This is lesson 4.7, sections and elevations. In this lesson, you will learn how to create an elevation viewport, learn to control elevation viewport settings, learn how to create a section viewport, and learn to control section viewport settings. Back to Vectorworks. This is our last movie for this module, and what we want to do now is to create sections and elevations. I'll start off with elevations, and you might notice I've already created a front view. So let's start with the plan view. Hit key 0 on my numeric keypad. And just remember, we created some of these legends to create objects. So they're going to come in the way sometimes. So let's go to create a side view. So let's start with the front view. I'm going to go to orthogonal, and I'm going to go to a front view. So that's my front view of my building, and I can either render it, so I can either produce these elevations in a rendered form. So let's just go here and we'll go to our OpenGL options. And we want to have those as very high quality. We want to draw edges, we want to use shadows and high quality shadows. So you can see from this case, we can actually see the shadowing of the building. If we change to a side view, there it is, there's the shadowing of the building, so the sun's coming down, striking the building, and that might really help to see our modeling of our building. If we go to a back view, that doesn't help so much because it's the entire building in shadow. So I've gone back to a plan view. I'm going to make a copy of this down here. Remember, it's the control or the option key, drag a copy along, and I'm just going to change this so it's about 45 degrees. This is light 1, this is light 2, and we're going to also look on our menu bar, window, palettes, and visualization. So let's go and have another look at those options. Orthogonal view, let's go to a front view, there it is there. We've got too many lights on, so let's turn off light 1, and there's light 2. And we're going to go to our OpenGL options, very high quality, draw edges, use shadows. Okay. So now that I've got two lights, I should be able to go to a side view. So key 6 on my numeric keypad, and there's a side view. Let's go now to key 4, and you can see this time we're in total shadow. So what I can do is I can turn off one light, turn on the other, and then I get my shadowing and my light effect. So I could create elevations using this technique. Let's go to a rectangle tool. We want a rectangle, and I'm going to create a rectangle like this. This is going to be my crop object. I'm just going to go to my object info palette, and I need this to be on the screen plane. If you don't put this on the screen plane, the object will not be the crop for my viewports. View on the menu bar. Create viewport. So there isn't an elevation viewport. Of course, we've got interior elevation viewports, section viewports, but I just want to create a regular or a plain elevation viewport, a new sheet layer, and this will be drawing 011, and this will be my elevations. What scale do we want? I think we need to go to 1 to 100 or 1/4 inch scale, because they won't fit on my page otherwise. And there's my rendering OpenGL. There are my render settings. It's picked up all the render settings from my view. And we're going to call this the south elevation, I think it is. South elevation. Elevation, I've spelled it correctly this time. Rendered view, orthogonal projection, and OK. And you remember I forgot to change my page setup, so I'm going to do that now just quickly. So there's my south elevation. Actually, I got confused. That was probably the east elevation, or the west, I think. West elevation. I'm just going to have a look down here to check what I've got. It's the left view, so that's my west elevation. and I'm going to use my selection tool to drag that here. If I drag a copy of this across and leave it there, I can now change this from a west view, or my west elevation, to my south view, which is the front. And you might notice when I do that, I've actually got my crop object cutting off part of my house. So I need to make sure I bring that across. Now if I don't use a crop object on this viewport, it will show, my viewport will end up showing these bits here which are part of my legend. So this is not my west but my south elevation, and I'm just going to pull that across. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to bring a copy of that down to here. It's going to be my north elevation, and drag a copy of that across. It's going to be my east elevation. So that's my back view. I wanted that one to be my back view. So back. And this one wants to be my right view. And just check your crops again to make sure that they're covering the right information and keeping out information you don't want to have shown. This one, edit the crop, make sure that comes across far enough there, and bring it back in this area. And there we are. So let's just have a look at all of those. I'm just going to highlight all of those and go to my object info palette and update them. Now when I update them, they should appear as rendered views. So that one is fine, that one is fine. Now this one has got the wrong light because it's all in shadow. What I can do is I can turn off that light and turn that one on, and do the same on this one. Turn that light off, turn that one on, update it, and you'll see I've got the other light turned on with the shadow coming from the other direction. So I've got three elevations that are working fairly well. Now I notice that this elevation here, this one called south, is in fact my north elevation. So let's just edit that. North elevation. And I notice it's got no lights on it. I want to go back to my design layer. Let's have a look here. Back to a plan view. You'll notice that I've got one light here and one light there. So I've got light shining on that side is fine, and light shining on that side not quite so fine. What I made the mistake of doing was having this one go the wrong direction. So I should really have had those two lights opposite each other. Now when I update my viewports, you should see that light showing the way I expect it. And there it is. Because this light here was showing both from that side, there was no light striking that side, and now that should be fine. So let's have a look at that. The angle, that's it, that's better. So I got the angle coming from there, that one, that's fine, that's perfect. So that was what I wanted. I wanted to have those elevations. Now this is not the only way to create these elevations. So what I'd like to do is to duplicate this one. I'm going to create a duplicate of this one. It's now number 12, so I'd like to select each of these elevations, only this time, instead of using the OpenGL rendering, I'm going to change this to hidden line rendering. Now you'll notice that my hidden line rendering does show the lines of my textures. These textures were set up to have hatches on them, so those hatches are showing up as part of my line. Right click, so I just want one viewport selected, right click on it, edit annotations. So this is where I control things like my drawing label. So I want that to line up with that point there. I've got maybe some heavy lines to put in here. There's a ground line that runs through here, and this ground line runs through about 200 millimeters or about 8 inches below this one. So I could just go there and subtract, or go modify and go move, and let's move that down. So minus 10 inches, around about 225 millimeters. So there it is there. That's where my ground line should be. So I can make that a heavy line. I can fill in the ground underneath there. So I'm going to use my polyline tool. In fact, what I'd like to do is I'd like to show you a trick that I use all the time. Let's put that back. But I'm going to draw a polyline through here. I'm going to make that slightly curved, slightly curved, slightly curved, and back to where I started. and that is a polyline, and the click drag creates the curvy lines. So let's make that very heavy, and let's give it a hatch that makes sense. Let's give it a hatch style, and I'm looking for a hatch called soil. There's no item shown. Let's just check everywhere. Soil, there's one there. I'll use a Vectorworks soil hatch. So that's my soil hatch. And you might think, well, we don't need this heavy line underneath it. Remember, in Tools and Commands and Details, Chapter 3, we looked at this tool, the Reshape tool. And it's got the ability to hide or show edges. And so that gives me my ground line. It also gives me a hatch which hides anything that's below it. And I've got the heavy line around the top where I want it, but nothing around the bottom where I don't want it. Now we also looked at this tool here, which is the 2D polygon tool, and we looked at it in this mode. So I'm just going to drag my cursor right around my entire house. And it creates that polygon. Let's give that polygon no fill, so I can see through it. We'll send it to the back, so modify, send to back, and we'll give that a slightly heavy line, so make it 0.5. So that gives a heavy line going around my building, which makes the building stand out, and I've got my ground line, and that's kind of works fairly well. If we want to put hatching in, we could hatch that area there, we could give it a hatch style, and you can see it's easy enough to fill in the elevation with the information we want. If we want to dimension it, we'll dimension it in the same place. So we're going to use the annotations, we'll dimension parts like that, we can dimension windows, and so on. So anything you need to add to the viewport, add it to the annotations part of the viewport. Let's look at making sections. So we're going to go back to our design layer. And we're going to change to a 3D view. I've hit key number 3 on my numeric keypad. And I'm going to activate this one here, the Show Clip Cube. Now this object was selected when I activated the clip cube, so I'm going to turn that off, because you'll notice when you activate the clip cube, it goes around the objects that are on the screen or selected. That's my clip cube there. I'm going to grab that edge, just click on it, and I'm going to start moving through my model. And you'll notice when I get near the model and I start pushing, it actually goes into my model and starts cutting through my model. So I can actually choose where I want my section to go through. Let's stop there. Right click, and I'm going to create a section viewport. And now it's going to create a section through my building. So we're going to put it on a new sheet layer. This is 013, because I've got 2 elevations. Sections. Okay, so we want this to be section A-A, and its number is 1. We're going to name this as, we can leave it there with the name. So this is section A-A. It's a custom scale. We're going to display planar objects, hidden line rendering, and we have the ability to create advanced section properties or control our advanced section properties. So our line length is limited by a section line length, which is the size of my crop box. The finite height range is controlled by, again, my clip cube. And the extents beyond the finite depth, that's how far back this clip cube goes. That's controlling that. So here we are, my attributes. We want to merge the cross-section or have separate cross-sections. For concept design, it's much better for you to have the merged cross-sections. When we do our separate cross-sections, then we have to make sure we've tightly controlled all of our objects. So for this stage, we're going to merge them together. We have an attribute class called section style, which will be the fill and the line weight for our cross-section here. And display, we might want black and white only, we want very high resolution, and we might want to boost our scale, our line weight and our line type scale. So let's make it 2 times and see what happens. Okay, and okay. you might notice it's come up as a perspective, and I'm going to change that to orthogonal, and then I need to update my viewport again. So there's my cross section. Let's have a look at our classes here, and there should be a new class that's just been created called section style. Here it is. User creation doesn't need to be ticked because our viewport is using it anyway, but I want to change this to a pattern with a background of white, and let's just have a look. We want it to be that one, and OK. In fact, it might be better if we changed our line weight as well and made that heavier. 0.5 might be good. Remember, this is a concept drawing. Let's update it and we'll see the difference. So there's my section. You can see it's got my solid objects, and because it's a conceptual drawing at this stage, I haven't worried about the concrete. I've just shown the solid objects. There's no ceiling through here. If I wanted a ceiling, I can just put another floor slab through there, and that will appear as a ceiling. Now there's a lot of information that we can go into with these sections and elevations, but really I want to keep some of that information back for the BIM course, the Building Information Modeling course. I think that covers enough. You know that we can edit the annotations of this and add dimensions, add a label, and so on. There's my label there, so there's my annotations. So I'm going to line up with that point. OK, and there's my section. This is the end of lesson 4.7. In this lesson you learned to create an elevation viewport. You learned to control elevation viewport settings. You learned how to control a section viewport, and you learned to control section viewport settings. This is the end of Module 4. In this module you learned how to draw walls, you learned how to insert doors and windows, you learned how to create roofs, you learned how to create slabs and floors, and you learned how to control cameras. And finally, you learned how to create sections and elevations.